With that, I would yield 7 minutes to my distinguished colleague and friend on the Homeland Security Committee. 7 minutes, Mr. Dent.
The gentleman is recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been a long debate, but 2 points must be absolutely clear at the outset. First, it is imperative that we continue to support our troops on the ground. Our service members deployed to Iraq have done a magnificent job. They have performed their missions admirably, effectively, and with valor. They have done everything we have asked them to do. They have made sacrifices, as have their families. They deserve our unqualified support. And as a member of Congress, I strongly disagree with some of my colleagues who have suggested cutting off funds for our troops serving in Iraq. A second point to be made here is that immediate withdrawal from Iraq, which has likewise been advocated by some members on the other side of the aisle, is also a bad idea. The Iraq Study Group has said that quote, it would be wrong for the United States to abandon the country to a precipitate withdrawal of troops and support, close quote. The National Intelligence Estimate of January 2007 says that, quote, if coalition forces were withdrawn rapidly during the term of this estimate, we judge that this almost certainly would lead to a significant increase in the scale and scope of sectarian conflict in Iraq, close quote. Religious conflict aside, there is another reason for avoiding immediate withdrawal, and that is simply that al-Qaeda and its affiliated groups still operate in Iraq. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's chief deputy, considers their efforts in Iraq to be crucial towards furthering al-Qaeda objectives in the region. Thus, these groups are aggressively pursuing terrorism within the borders of that country, committing acts of violence against Shias, Kurds, and anyone else who dares to disagree with them. By instigating this mayhem and bloodshed in Iraq, al-Qaeda hopes to realize its supreme goal, to destabilize the government, assume control over the country and its oil wealth, and eventually install a Taliban-style government in Baghdad. This is not good for the United States. It is not good for Iraq. And it is not good for the region. And that is why I oppose immediate withdrawal. That being said, and understanding the need for Congress to debate the issue of the war, I am disappointed in the way this debate has taken shape. The majority has given much time for us to express our views, but it has limited the options that might be employed to make this legislation more effective. They allowed no amendments, either from Republicans or from their own Democratic colleagues. They refused to permit any substitutes, and they even denied us a motion to recommit. By putting before us this highly restrictive rule, the other side has effectively foreclosed dialogue on other measures that might have added substance to the debate, while both Democrats and Republicans utilize the Iraq Study Group findings to justify their positions. The majority leadership has refused to consider my colleague from Virginia's legislation, that's Mr. Frank Wolf, his legislation, H-Con Res 45, which would implement some of the most significant recommendations of the Iraq Study Group's report. This legislation would emphasize the need for U.S. forces to accelerate the training of their Iraqi counterparts, would establish milestones for success in Iraq, and would promote diplomatic initiatives in order to advance stability in the country and in the region. And yet, no debate on such a bill, and no opportunity to offer an amendment consistent with those objectives was tolerated by the majority. What does this say about their commitment to fulfilling the objectives recommended by the Iraq Study Group's report? You know, we're all speaking about this report, but we're simply not voting on it. That's wrong. I stand before you today in my second term in Congress as someone who has tried to understand the Iraq War from many different viewpoints. I've talked with my constituents, both pro and con, about the war. I've listened to military and intelligence briefings. I have visited Iraq. I have studied the Iraq Study Group report. I have read journal articles, academic studies, and news clips on the subject, all to increase my professional awareness of what is going on over there. But I do not just see this from a professional perspective. The Iraq War has had personal consequences for me as well. One of my staffers, Jason Lane, is a reservist who has been called to active duty and is deployed there right now. I have talked with the troops who have served there. I have visited the wounded in hospitals, and most painfully, attended the funerals of those who gave to this country what Abraham Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion. I attended one of those funerals just last Friday. From all this, I must admit I have my concerns about the efficacy of the President's troop surge. I believe that it is far more important that the Iraqis show the political will to achieve reconciliation and end the sectarian violence that is slowly but surely strangling their capital and their country. As Prime Minister Maliki said on November 27, 2006, quote, "The crisis is political, and ones who can stop the cycle of aggravation and the bloodletting of innocents are the politicians." Close quote. Success in Iraq is essential to achieving America's foreign policy objectives, and it is in America's best interest to make sure that Iraq can sustain, govern, and defend itself. But I believe in holding Prime Minister Maliki to his word. We cannot and will not abandon our troops who are currently on the ground in Iraq. We must make sure that our forces effectively engage al-Qaeda as opposed to mediating a Sunni-Shiite conflict that is the responsibility of the Iraqi government to resolve, as we all know. These are the challenges facing this Congress, and these are challenges that must be met in a bipartisan manner. With that,